The following webinar is presented by the E-Extension Farm Energy Community of Practice at extension.org and the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension.
So John introduced me briefly. So I'm North Dakota's bioenergy economist. It was a position created in 2007 by the state legislature at the time that corn ethanol was clearly coming online, and the expectation was that cellulosic would be following soon after. That's been a little bit slower in developing, at least here in North Dakota. There's, of course, projects across the country that are nearing commercialization this year. But my position was really created to work with industry and to work with potential growers as they investigated growing new energy crops and developing new projects in the state. As I mentioned, that the original expectation was that the project would be cellulosic ethanol, but that hasn't happened. Instead, what the primary project here in North Dakota has been the utilization of beets for sugar, which could then be converted to ethanol, other biofuels, and other bioproducts. Today I'm going to give a general overview of efforts that have been underway in the state. I've been involved with this project actively for the last 3 years, doing a number of different things, and I'll also talk about working with EPA. Our department and myself in particular have been working with EPA to get the pathway approved for an industrial beet to ethanol biofuel. So to kind of step back and give the big picture idea of what the play is, it isn't unlike much of what's going on in biofuels, but the idea is how can we get to a low-cost green sugar? And so right now, globally, we have two relatively low-cost, relatively green ways of doing that. One is sugarcane in Brazil, and the other is cornstarch here in North America. Of course, here in North America, we're going to convert that starch into glucose and then ferment it into alcohol. But in the case of beets, sugar beet, the sugar is already present within the plant, so that step can be avoided. All you need to do is mechanically extract that sugar. Talking about the sugar pathway in general, it tends to work well because sugar is nature's intended, easy-to-access source of energy. So we have yeast that can ferment it into alcohol and a number of other processes that can be used to produce a wide range of biofuels and bioproducts. In the last 150 years, beets have been proven to be an economical way of producing sugar, although not as economical as some in certain years, as we've seen pressure from global sugarcane production. But we can still produce most years in most ways a crop of sugar using beets. But what we're talking about in general is not food-grade sugar, but rather an industrial sugar that can be used to produce those biofuels and bioproducts. And really that's kind of moving into the idea of the project as proposed in the state, and that is to re-engineer the system. From what it is today, we have existing sugar beet mills and sugar beet producers who are targeting the food market, and we expect them to continue to do that. But the new project, the new vision is that in the central part of the state, where sugar beets have not been traditionally grown, is to design, develop, implement, and operate a system that's goal is to produce low-cost, green industrial sugars. So I've already kind of talked about this a bit, but I feel I should define what an industrial beet, and another term used in previously is energy beets. Basically, these are varieties of sugar beets, or the scientific name is Beta vulgaris. But this material is intended from the start to be used for industrial purposes. So this is different than sugar beet as we know it when it's intended to produce food. There's been a system designed over the last 150 years to profitably produce crystal sugar, which we as consumers will pay a premium for. So as we go to the grocery store, and we'll pay an extra $1 or $2 to get that crystal sugar, that nice white crystal sugar that's 99.95% sucrose, and that's what the system in place is designed to do. With industrial beets, the goal is to profitably produce a low-cost and also green industrial sugar. So this can have impurities in it that a sugar beet processing factory would not want. It can also have other sugars, fructose and glucose specifically, that can still be fermented or converted into other products, but that would be a loss to a sugar mill. The idea for this, or one of the motivations for this, is actually an experience in Europe. About 6 years ago, Europe changed their agricultural policy and essentially lowered the support for sugar beet into ethanol. Europe is the home of the sugar beet industry, and most of the technology companies, the seed technology companies, are located there. After that change in policy, sugar beet growers and sugar beet processors wanted to continue on in the business. The farmers enjoyed growing beets. It was a valued part of their rotation. The processors had existing front-end capacity to extract the juice, sugar juice, from the beet. And so what they did in Europe is they bolted on fermentation back ends to these existing facilities and began producing significant amounts of ethanol. The question then became is why couldn't you do it here in North America? So for the past 6 years, there's been projects across the country. The two strongest ones are located here in North Dakota, and there's another in California. These are traditional areas of traditional sugar beet production. There's also been smaller efforts in many states across the country. But to kind of step back and talk about big picture national opportunities, right now I have a US DOE grant that's looking at the industry from a national perspective and how it might differ from location to location. And there really is a fundamental difference first in how the beet would be produced, or the production of the beet and how it relates to transportation and storage, and also a configuration of the plant based on those impacts, driven primarily by climate. The first example is the traditional model is something dubbed spring beets, and so this is a plant that's seeded in the spring and harvested in the fall. Most sugar beet production that continues to this day in Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, Idaho, and Wyoming follows this model. And the reason for this is clear. It's driven by climate. And there's two reasons for that. The first is that beets are a cold season crop, and they tend to put on sugar best after spending their first 90 days establishing themselves. Those long days and cool nights drive sugar production, both quality and quantity. And so beets do best in these cooler climates. And then, of course, here, especially in North Dakota and Minnesota, we have free cold storage, which helps with the economics. The beet is harvested and stored in outdoor piles. The processing of those beets occurs throughout the winter and ends just in time for the warmer spring temperatures, which would make outdoor storage uneconomical. Looking at the rotation for a spring beet, and this is what we have already in the Red River Valley of North Dakota and Minnesota, is corn, soybean, small grain, and then beet rotation. Typically, beets are grown, seeded into wheat or barley because it provides a seed bed that helps with beet emergence and success. A new alternative is planting beets in the fall, letting them grow over the winter, and then harvesting them sometime in the spring. This is a great idea because it would be a new crop utilizing land that would be left fallow during this period, which really helps with the land use implications. And as I start to talk about advanced biofuel designation and greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprints, this is very helpful because there is no land use impact. This land would have been left fallow. One of the challenges with this is that you need to be sure that you're going to plant in an area where hard freezes are unlikely. And this last week in much of the southeastern part of the United States is a case where there would likely be a crop loss. And so that's another consideration. An example of where this would occur, initially it was the Mississippi Delta. Now, after this week especially, I'm thinking that the only place you'd really want to do this is the Everglades of Florida, Brownsville, Texas, and the Imperial Valley of California. Another alternative is just-in-time beets, and this is actually similar to what has been practiced in California, or was practiced in California, while the sugar beet industry was still active there. And that's the idea. Beets will continue to grow until there's a hard freeze, and in many parts of California, including the San Joaquin Valley, you can plant beets over the course of a few months and just leave them in the field until you're ready to harvest them and transport them to the processing facility. And so that in this case, you don't have to have off-site storage. You just harvest them just in time. So moving back to North Dakota specifically, the work that we've done at North Dakota State in partnership with the developers has really been to sit back and design a system that is going to produce industrial beets that would be converted to sugar, which would then be a platform or a feedstock for other biofuels and bioproducts. And really the idea is driven by the trade-offs between financial profitability and greenhouse gas emissions and the designation as an advanced biofuel by EPA. So this is a slide that comes from the project developers, and just to give you a little bit of an idea of where the project is at. The first phase began about 6 years ago. There was an engagement between the developers and seed companies. During that time, they conducted a feasibility study and also did research into field trials across the state to see if beets would perform well outside of traditional growing regions. Right now in the Red River Valley, the eastern quarter of the state, there's considerable sugar beet production. But outside of that, beets have not traditionally been grown. And one of the questions that the developers had was, can you get adequate yields in these areas? Another line of research that was done was burn tests. This is the idea of utilizing the stillage, the material left in the bottom of the still during fermentation, as a fuel to heat the plant. Currently, the project is finishing up phase 2. This continued yield trials across the state. To date, we've had 45 yield trials, dryland and irrigated, across different production regions in the state. A lot of effort's been placed on front-end processing and juice storage, which I'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. Work is being done to develop a crop insurance for the crop. Obviously, producers won't grow without it. And then one thing that we're working on at NDSU in my department is the advanced biofuel petition with EPA. Movement towards commercialization is in full swing. I just spent the last week at 5 grower meetings to engage potential growers to gauge their interest in producing this new crop. There's a lot of work that needs to be done as far as finalizing the process and with the strategies that the processor would pursue. The plan is, and I guess that slide is out of date, it should be 16 or 17 is when the first crop would be grown and facility built. In general, it wouldn't take long to put the facility together. It's not high-tech work to extract sugar from a beet. You could do it in your kitchen if you wanted to. And, of course, fermentation is a proven technology. So there's not much technology risk with this. It's really getting the producers in line. Talking about the project and the project partners, there's 2 private entities who are involved with this. Green Vision Group is made up of 3 North Dakota entrepreneurs. And Heartland Renewable Energy is an Iowa-based organization, and they provide the engineering expertise. They partnered early on with Beta Seed and Syngenta. I'm sure you're familiar with Syngenta. Beta Seed is one of the largest sugar beet seed technology companies in the world, based in Germany. And then they've contracted considerably with NDSU to do a number of different types of conduct a number of activities. The Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics, where I'm located, we've overseen a lot of the work, been the lead PI on a lot of activities, conducted feasibility analyses, worked on the life cycle analysis, that type of work. Other work has gone to Ag and Biosystems Engineering to conduct front-end processing research, juice and whole beet storage research, and some fermentation research. And then, of course, our experiment station, we have stations, research stations across the state, and they've been in charge of the yield trials. We've received support from North Dakota communities in the state of North Dakota through the Ag Products Utilization Commission, which is APUC, and the North Dakota Renewable Energy Council. NDSU, and my team specifically, has received additional funding from USDA and USDOE. As far as the research, I think I've already gone over most of this. So we have the ag engineers doing front-end research at how do you best extract the juice from the beet, whole beet and juice storage, with the idea that it would be best to find the economical place where you can store whole beets or juice. Field trials have continued, as I've mentioned, and then crop insurance. To talk a little bit more about front-end processing, and I don't expect you to see the top figure extremely well, but that's the model used by Pucht, which is the predominant German-based sugar beet equipment manufacturer. And the whole point of that figure is to express, not with any precision, but just in general, that there's a lot of activity that goes on in a sugar beet factory to extract juice. And again, what's important to note about existing sugar beet mills is their intended product is sucrose. That's the business that they're in. And so they have a lot of expensive energy intense machines that try to maintain the sucrose content of the liquid that goes through the process. They need to be very, very delicate. If you're not delicate with sucrose, it'll break in half and you'll have fructose and glucose, which consumers don't want to pay for. But that's quite different from what the industrial beet or an industrial sugar process would be, because in that case, it doesn't matter as much today if that inversion of sugar occurs, because you can ferment fructose and glucose. So the bottom figure is the much more basic process that is expected to be used for the front ends of these industrial beet mills. And here it's much more basic and much more brutal. In a sugar beet factory, they use knives, which slice the beet into very thin cassettes. In the proposed model for the industrial sugar factory would be instead to throw the beets into a hammer mill, which is a very brutal process. We know that some of the sucrose will be damaged and break down into fructose and glucose, but again, that's not an issue. But in general, you can take the 38 steps that are required to go from beet to a juice for a sugar mill down to about 3 or 4 for an industrial mill. Studies been done on beet and whole beet and juice storage. Again, the idea is to hopefully find that place where it's economic to utilize the plant for more days out of the year, not knowing exactly where that division would be. Here's one of our graduate students, an extremely bright guy, who's actually, his dissertation involves both the whole beet and the juice storage. What we found in general is that applying chemicals to beets, the research that was done at NDSU was really inconclusive. Other work has been done in Germany, and that was found that you can store beets for long periods of time, over a year, in ambient conditions, but the cost of doing so is really economically prohibitive. But for example, they did apply a chemical to beets, which would make it unsuitable to convert that into, or to use that material to produce food-grade sugar, but would still be suitable for an industrial sugar. But, they applied this chemical, left the beets outside in the Imperial Valley of California, and, after 12 months, it was still possible to utilize that beet. But that research found the cost would be too expensive, the chemicals would be too expensive. The approach that NDSU took found that it would be, that the impacts were negligible. What NDSU has found is that you can modify the pH of a thick juice and store it indefinitely. And really, at a basic level, what you're doing is you're creating a jam. And so, we've created this jam adjusting the pH and stored it for 6 months, and I'm sure it would store longer, but that the research ended at that point as it was proven to be a viable alternative. As far as yield trials, as I mentioned, there's been 45 yield trials across the state, and these numbers do go through last year. I don't know if there's many beet producers online today or will be watching in the future, but beets in general, in the Red River Valley, which would be the counties on the eastern side of the state, somewhere between 20 and 25 tons per year would be an acceptable yield. That would be an acceptable yield. But the that research was found that the cost would be too expensive to chemicals to be used for the front ends of these industrial beet mills. And here it's much more basic and much more brutal. In a sugar beet factory, they use knives, which slice the beet into very thin cassettes. then it would be a good year. One of the questions was, in general, could you produce outside this region, and if so, what would the yields be? I'm not the agronomist who led these trials, but if you had the opportunity to speak with them, the results are quite impressive. We've had a diversity of years as far as production. The first 3 years, beets, which are Roundup Ready, were a regulated crop, so each of these plantings, each of these trials was a regulated event, which means that there was paperwork that had to be completed before the seed could be planted, and that really delayed, in many cases, the planting date. So in most cases, what you want to do is you want to plant a beet in late April, early May, and in many cases we're planting in late May or even June. But again, the yields are very high. If you think about that 25 to 30 range, most of these trials are in that or above it. We've also had, in 2012, we had a drought, not as bad as most of the rest of the country, but we were very dry in August and September. Still had very high yields, including on dry land. And then this last year we had a very late spring. Many of the beets in 2013 weren't planted until the middle of June and still had high production. There are a few years with very low tonnage, if you can see that. There's a 16.2 and a 14.5. It's actually due to herbicide carryover, which is a critical issue in the state. Beets are, a crop with certain characteristics like any other crop or plant, and you need to make sure that the growers need to make sure that they monitor their chemical application history to ensure that the plants can have a good start. And even that 20 ton per year was a herbicide-affected field. One thing, too, is, this is outside of the valley. This is actually diversity. North Dakota is a fairly large state, so these are pretty different growing conditions. Also, too, is, this is a new grow-out area, and so there's a lot of opportunity for these beets to thrive, and that's what we've seen. Looking at the business that these processors would be in, that these growers would be in, the goal is in tonnage. The goal is to produce sugar, and so there is a trade-off between the quantity of beet coming off the field and the sugar content. In general, the existing sugar, the food sugar processors and the growers would like to see somewhere between 16 and 18%, and that's what we've seen. In some locations better than others. And again, the bigger plants, if you go over to those on the left-hand side, that left-hand side column, those were some high-yielding irrigated plots, and their sugar percentage is a little bit lower. Just as a piece of hip pocket information, in general, you can get about twice as many gallons of ethanol from an acre of sugar beets than you can from corn, because it is a sugar crop. And then over time, the expectation is to breed 4 traits that are going to increase that sugar yield per acre. Some agronomic benefits that came about during the trials. North Dakota has a number of fields, millions of acres that are adversely affected by soil salinity. We have a major initiative in the state to address that through whatever means necessary. So there's a research and extension effort underway. And what's been found by NDSU scientists, really outside of this effort, is that this beet, an industrial beet in this case, is probably one of the best tools in the toolbox to help address this soil health issue. And it really goes back to this deep taproot. There aren't many crops in the rotation in that part of the state where the facility would likely be sited that have a root like that. And so it provides a number of benefits. First, it allows the beet to access nutrients and moisture at a different profile than existing crops. So this helped in 2012 with the drought conditions that we experienced. It also provided access to nutrients that would otherwise be inaccessible. And it, by having that taproot there, it allows for the movement of salts and other materials, throughout that soil profile. We have a number of scientists who, have taken note of this, and many of them have developed their own research programs to investigate, the rotational benefits and the salinity or soil health benefits of beets. It's actually kind of tough because they've gone off on their own and I almost have to track them down and stay in touch with them regarding what they're doing and what it might mean to the project. I've already mentioned herbicide carryover. This is a very important issue. The carryover for a number of commonly used chemicals can be 2 years or longer. So last year, when we first became aware of this issue, we issued a press release at NDSU just giving potential growers a heads up regarding their use of these crops, at the least to keep track of what they're using, because again, we had the unfortunate experience of planting the crops to fields that were affected, and you saw the yields. That's obvious. It's not economical to grow beets in a field with that type of carryover. So the first would be just to notify farmers to let them identify if they have fields available. Then also, as the project moves towards commercialization, for them to be possibly changing their crop management regime, the chemicals they use, to ensure that they might have fields available if they want to pursue it. I've done a number of economic analyses. I'm not going to get too far into it. As far as the economics, in general, there's profit within the system between the production of beets and the conversion to industrial sugar and ethanol. But the question is, who's going to get what? How much profit does a farmer need to grow this new crop? So I did a quick analysis for the USDOE to kind of investigate, how well could beets return, what kind of returns could beets provide to farmers and still keep the ethanol facility, the processing facility profitable. And if you look at that third line, that black line, we found that most of the last 7 years that, beets could beat corn, which would be the crop to beat even here in North Dakota, in some years by a significant margin. So this is meant to communicate to growers that, it is possible, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the price that they would require would be acceptable and provide an appropriate rate of return, ROI, for project developers and investors in the processing facility. Kind of getting the meat of this, and I know I'm running out of time. I know we wanted to leave room for questions. The EPA petition. So you started the talk off with low-cost green sugars. One of the ways to identify how green your product is by conducting a life cycle assessment. And here in the United States, one of the big key holders of that is the EPA. In order to sell biofuels in the United States, in order to generate renewable identification numbers and possibly extract any premium from the biofuels market, you do need to have certification or an approved designation by EPA regarding the amount of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the fuel. So, the RFS mandates the use of different biofuels by type. We now know clearly that EPA can and will adjust that level based on different issues. Right now we're wondering what they're going to do with this blend wall. Right now, the expectation was that this industrial beet ethanol would be designated as an advanced biofuel. We did complete a life cycle assessment in 2011. So it's been 3 years now that we conducted that preliminary analysis. And we can, in Fargo, do a very good job, like others can, of quantifying energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. With that in hand, it was clearly, there's clearly an advanced biofuel plus a little bit of gravy. But what we don't have in Fargo is the ability to model land use change as EPA would. We don't have their models. And so we did submit the petition a little over 2 years ago. We provided supplemental information, been in communication with them now for almost 2 years. The process has been very slow, and that's not a criticism of anyone specifically at EPA. They have more on their table than they can deal with. They have a team that's working on it, but they have, a few dozen petitions. Everyone wants to get theirs done. Everyone thinks they should be first. I think that this petition is about, I think it's in the top 8 or 9 as far as being in line. It has been moving slowly. The project developers did engage the congressional delegation here in North Dakota, hopefully spur the process, because that may or may not be helpful. Moving into siting, right now, As I mentioned, there were grower meetings this week. 5 communities have been identified. They started with a list of about 13. The project developers went through some siting criteria and evaluation and identified 5 potential sites for the first facility. Just some background information. The idea is to have almost county-level facilities for rural development purposes and also to accommodate the logistics of beet transportation and storage. These facilities may or may not produce ethanol or a final product. They may end with industrial sugar. That would be based on the economics of the time and at the time of construction. So just to talk about a particular facility, the baseline for prototype plant would be 20 million gallons per year. So this is substantially smaller than the last generation of corn ethanol refineries. And again, the reasons for that is the logistics of the beet and also the environmental, the carbon footprint associated with the transportation of those beets. So this is about 750,000 tons of beets, which is a lot of material, but this is still substantially smaller than what we see for sugar production in the Red River Valley. At 25 tons an acre, that's 30,000 dryland acres. Given a 4-year rotation, which is kind of the best practice for production, it would be 120,000 acres. The expectation is that most of that would be within 20 miles of the plant for both economic and environmental reasons. And of course, if the land is irrigated, there'd be substantially less land needed. There'd also be less risk associated with the supply of the feedstock. Stepping back and, we're moving towards commercialization here in the state. One of the issues that's come across is the role of the growers, and this gets back to the plant itself, the beet itself. Because the plant isn't easily stored or transported, a locally available feedstock is necessary. This isn't corn ethanol where if by chance you had a local crop failure, you could source it from the next county over, or if need be, from across the country. There needs to be adequate local supply, and that really gets to this issue of where growers are critical. That is the number one siting criteria, and that's why these grower education meetings that began this week are important. An NDSU and NDSU Extension, I have a majority extension appointment. We're working with growers to make sure that they have the information that they need to make the decision to grow the crop. And so that is a factor both at for their own operation, for their own farm, and then also community-wide to make sure that they have the acres that they might need to support a plant. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but in summary, what we've seen is that beets show a lot of promise. The question was asked at a grower meeting, is this going to go or is it not going to go? And the truth is, and the developer's response, and I would give the same one, is that there's been nothing to say that the project should stop, but there's certainly no guarantee that it will be a tremendous victory. There's still a more detailed analysis that needs to be done, and a lot of that will come from these conversations with the growers. Efforts to commercialize are underway. It's moving from being a research project to an actual project being developed. And the key issue right now is to make sure the growers are ready. They need to decide if they want to grow, and also if they have fields that aren't adversely affected with those herbicides, which would make production challenging.
This webinar has been brought to you by the Farm Energy Community of Practice and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension. For more information, go to farmenergymedia.extension.org.